All right, so hello everyone, welcome back. So today we are going to resume the remainder of our unit number 8. Uh, hope you remember what we discussed on the last day under this particular unit. So we are in the middle of the future of work, challenges and controversies. We have discussed several new concepts and controversies specific to the concept of new economy. Uh, I hope you remember the case of Uber drivers, that litigation that I explained to you about, and how it has created controversies among people regarding how to classify labor. And then we talked about this on-demand economy and the gig economy, which creates new opportunities for people, new employment opportunities, whether it's really good or whether it's really bad. There are both pros and cons of these. And then we also talked about the concept of offshoring, right? And its plus points, and also how it can sometimes create certain ambiguities. And we talked about the concept of the second machine age, how the concept of this automation has changed the nature of employment in itself, and what types of changes it might cause for the future of work. So, resuming the discussion, today we are coming to 8.4, a new subtopic under this unit. We are talking about new marketplaces, right? So, under this area, let's see what sort of novelties have been introduced and how it has actually impacted labor, how it has impacted the world of work, right? Right. So the first point says a growing fraction of economic activity is being organized through marketplace like platforms. Now, unlike the traditional economy, where you constantly refer to the place of trade as a marketplace, අපි කියනවානේ marketplace කියන එක ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මේ digital economy එකේදී market space එකක් වෙලා තියෙනවා කියනවා. The marketplace that we refer to in traditional economics has transferred essentially to the concept of a market space, where we say that no longer we are geographically bound, rather a digital platform or a digital space, a virtual space is what brings the buyers and the sellers together. Or that is the sort of economy that we operate in, right? So economic activities are increasingly being organized and transferred and executed through these kinds of marketplace like, that means platforms that look a lot like marketplaces, right? They are essentially existing in virtual environments. A frequent concern associated with such marketplaces is that they will depress wages as more qualified workers flood restricted markets, and as transparency and competition drive down the price of labor to the textbook ideal of perfectly competitive markets. Now, what is the concern, or let's say a potential downside that could be associated with these platforms? It is that they will depress wages. How can this depression of wages or driving down of wages can happen via these platforms? Why? As more qualified workers flood restricted markets. So more and more qualified workers keep entering these kinds of marketplaces. Therefore, more transparency happens. Also, another feature is that there is transparency in these kinds of marketplaces, more information availability. We'll talk how those things happen in the coming slides, right? So because of this more transparency and high competition, as more and more workers get embedded in these platforms, or get let's say they get an entry point to these platforms, what happens is that kind of competition drives the price of labor gradually downwards, And this emanates, or this resurfaces the concept of perfectly competitive markets that we also learn in traditional economics, right? That kind of concept can also operate in these kinds of settings. In figure 7.1, wage rates of providers on a large US-based labor platform across a range of professions to the corresponding wage rates of those professions that have been complied by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, the most comprehensive source of data about wages in the United States, are compared in San Francisco in summer 2015. So this figure that we are going to observe in the next slide, it is actually a comparison between the wage rates earned by a popular labor platform found in the United States, compared by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, that they the statistics that they have gained from the usual traditional labor markets of the country, right? So it shows a comparison between the two during the year 2015. So if you observe this graph, right, you will see. So on this side, a demonstration of digital labor marketplace average wage rate has shown. So this attributes to those usage of platforms, right, or a digital labor market. While on the other hand, on this side, we find the Bureau of Labor Statistics average rate for the given area of San Francisco, right? So for example, what it tries to showcase is, now if we take this area of photography, right? How is the wage rate? The comparison is made between how is the wage rate for photography set in a digital marketplace versus the wage rate for photography in a BLS-based, statistic-based market, right? A labor statistic-based, the usual traditional market you find in the area of San Francisco, right? It is that kind of a comparison. Now, if we try to compare between the two shown here, now, for example, if we take that same area of photography, right, shown here, now let's try to do a comparison here in the digital labor market. It's between $30 to $40 average wage rate, but closer to 30. But if we compare this with the BLS labor statistics here, you can see it's somewhere between $20 to $30, right? Average wage rate. So can you see that in the digital market, the wage rate attributed for this area is higher than the wage rate attributed via the traditional market based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? Also, on the other hand, if we take an occupation such as this, web design and development, now look at what kind of difference it shows, right? Now, when compared with the digital labor market and between the traditional setting, now here for web design and development, somewhere close to $30 is earned if you are doing this web designing and development on a digital platform. But look here, if you do the same in an established like traditional market, you can earn more than $40 here, right? So can you see the difference? So for jobs like photography, it's one way of behavior, but something like this, web designing, graphic design, computer support, writing and editing, these kinds of occupations have achieved a higher wage rate, right? So keep that observation in mind, right? Keep that in mind, right? So let's move forward. Research has suggested that workers can generally expect to earn more per hour getting their freelance assignments through a digital labor market than by seeking through traditional channels, even after they pay the platform its commission. Now, research have constantly tried to highlight the fact that by engaging in digital markets, by participating in platform-based markets, right? Even after paying the platform on some commission now, because to participate in this kind of market, it is obvious that the labor, the person who's supplying labor, in order to be registered in those kinds of platforms, they will have to pay a fee, a commission. Even after paying that commission, research suggests that still it is more profitable to work in that kind of digital or platform-based markets, and that there is a higher possibility to earn more money per hour for doing things like freelance work, which we talked about during our last class, right? So that wage rate, research suggests, is higher than what you can earn through traditional channels. So these findings form an instructive starting point to explore why the emergence of new marketplaces isn't necessarily bad news for workers who, choose to provide services through them, right? So these kinds of findings have created the impression, have created a sort of a discussion point, paving way to explore more on this emergence of new types of marketplaces. And it has created the impression that it's not necessarily bad to participate in these kinds of new labor markets and to behave yourself as laborers in these kinds of platforms. A closer look at the data, however, suggests that this on-demand wage premium is not uniform across occupations. That is true, right? Now, through this graph, we clearly observe that while some occupations have show a tendency of earning high potential showing high potential of earning wages, some other occupations also, on the other hand, indicate that it's not so, right? It's not uniformly distributed across all types of occupations, so to speak, right? As illustrated for a sample of the most frequently listed occupations, right? Like these ones we have shown here. While many have significantly higher wage rates, workers in others are making less per hour than the national averages. So although the national average, mostly observed occupation types have been illustrated here, and the average national wage rates have been tabulated on the axis, it is obvious that some occupations are earning lower than some others, right? So what causes this difference? Or how can we explain this difference? Well, first, most services offered on a marketplace like Handy or TaskRabbit, now these are platforms that can be used. This Handy platform, for instance, is something which you find in the to connect consumers and labor suppliers in the household related services market. For example, if you're looking a handyman to complete some task in your house, through this Handy platform, you can easily source that kind of labor, right? TaskRabbit, we talked about the last session, during the last session. So first, most services offered on marketplaces like this, like Handy and TaskRabbit, require the provider to be geographically collocated with the customers. Now, for instance, on this platform Handy, where, for example, if I'm looking for a plumber, if I'm looking for a handyman to do some repairing work in my house, essentially that person has to be located near my house, right? So the geographical vicinity, that closeness is essential for these kinds of tasks to be effective, right? So it requires the provider to be geographically connected in some other way, in one way or the other, with the customers. Thus, while the launch of a platform in a city might cause small initial increase in the availability of cleaners and repair persons, that means by initiating this kind of a labor platform in a certain city, right? When that kind of platform becomes popular in a certain city, while there is a tendency that at the initial starting point, there will be some degree of increment or an increase in the cleaners and the repair persons that are available, right? While there is a more degree of choice, as more people with full-time jobs decide to do a bit of home cleaning or plumbing on the side, the platform is not yet in the business of training or certifying new workers. So while initially there might be a hike in labor suppliers, right, in laborers, increasingly it is not only purely these kinds of plumbers or repair persons who are signing up with the platform. Even people who are engaged in other kinds of job may sign up with these kinds of platforms, and these people may also seek employment as part-time or side job on this kind of platforms. But the issue is these kinds of platform only like provide a connecting point for suppliers and consumers, but they do not provide any kind of certification or training to these kinds of employees. So TaskRabbit's arrival in a city, for example, does not result in a sudden surge in certified electricians or a flood of new plumbers into that city. So therefore, just because a platform like TaskRabbit becomes popular in a city, it does not guarantee that it will suddenly make electricians, qualified electricians, more available for work, or that any other such occupations are more available through those platforms for people who are seeking that kind of services, and especially considering the fact that they have the right qualification to do that job, right? Rather, it makes it easier for the city's existing electricians and plumbers to find people in need of their services. And it gives these customers a greater number of choices beyond their neighborhood plumber. So what happens is, rather than just, unusually increasing the number of workers in these kinds of platform, number of qualified workers, right? What really happens is these kind of platforms provide a better opportunity for people like electricians and plumbers and repair workers and so on, provide a better opportunity for them to find work through the platform, because they can easily find who is needing their job. Otherwise, they have to wait. In traditional market, they have to wait until someone calls them for a job, ask them to come for a job, right? Or maybe they have to go through an agency or something like that. On the other hand, these kinds of platforms benefit the consumers in the sense that it gives the consumers a greater choice, right? Rather than just asking the Sunil uncle or Nihal uncle or someone like that. It's just namesake that I'm using, right? So someone like that to come and repair your house, I don't know, to engage in some wiring work, your next door neighbor or your village plumber or the electrician. Instead of having to always depend on these kinds of people, consumers have a better choice in choosing among a wider range of qualified service providers, right? By the word qualified, what I mean is they provide more choice for consumers to select from people who are already engaging in these occupations that they did not previously know, right? They may be experts in job already. They may have been engaging in that job for a long period of time, but maybe they did not get access. Consumers did not get access to their services because they didn't know they existed, right? So these platforms make that a reality. A number of individual factors explain why some on-demand workers get paid more than others. So how can we explain why some types of workers get paid more than others? These reasons could include experience levels of workers, right? Maybe more experienced people get paid more. Geography, when people are closer to the place of work that is requesting work, there is a high tendency of finding work. And whether the platform certifies them as being superior provider or not. Sometimes platforms have these types of grading scales, no? දැන් අපි උදාහරණයට Uber වගේ platform එකක් ගත්තත්, although we do not pay much attention to that, they do rank their drivers in some way or the other, right? There's a ranking system happening. So sometimes the platform itself, now it is the user who is providing the ranking for the drivers in platforms like Uber. No? So sometimes likewise platform itself, right? Platform itself may provide certain certifications or they might vouch for the ability of the service providers on their platform. So these kinds of instances or these kinds of criteria might explain why some types of workers earn more in these kinds of platforms. However, on an occupation as a whole, what seems to matter most is whether the worker needs to be present at the actual geographic location where the work is being requested. Although there may be several criteria which decides what makes the laborer gets paid more, the most important factor, as have been identified, is the geographical vicinity. If the person is closer to the place where work is requested, then that is what really matters, right? Although the supply of workers in professions that require supply-demand collocation is not significantly affected by the presence of an online marketplace, so although in settings where or let's say in professions where the supply of that profession and the demand for that profession matters, right? Significantly matters for the healthy functioning of those kinds of professions. So in that kind of settings, even if the supply of workers that require that kind of a connection to be there in supply demand settings may not be affected by having an online marketplace, a likely demand effect is that more people now seek these services when they need them. What might really happen is that even if supply of workers for these kinds of settings where in marketplaces the supply of work and the need for work matters a lot, right? Even though supply, like increase in the supply of work does not significantly affect by the presence of online marketplace, when we consider the demand side, right? When we consider the demand side of in these kinds of settings, the consumers may be more benefited. Why? Because now they have the ability of having a wider choice or seeking whenever they want that kind of a need that needs to be fulfilled. That might not be the case in a traditional market, right? Now, for example, rather than leaving that kind, let's say in a bathroom, a drain is broken or overflowing, right? Or let's say a wiring has come off or something gone wrong with the electricity wiring system in a house. Sometimes these things may continue on for a long period of time without being attended in homes if they cannot find a suitable worker or if they cannot find a suitable person to work on those issues, right? So therefore, rather than leaving those drainage systems or the wirings unattended, because usually in a traditional market, these professionals may also charge high rates for this kind of work. Now they don't have to wait like that because consumers can very conveniently at a reasonable price find suppliers of these kinds of services via these kinds of online marketplaces, right? Therefore, even though we do not see a significant difference in the supply of workers in these kind of marketplaces, what is important is that more liberation or more freedom is obtained by the demand side, right? So moving on, what expands, therefore, is the market rather than the number of available workers in these fields. So rather than making the number of people service suppliers, rather than observing a increase in the number of people who are willing to work, what really happens is that the marketplace essentially gets expanded, right? Put differently, new marketplaces increase ease of access. What really happens is people have more access to these services. If I have something broken in my home, I have better access to a service provider, right? The demand for many of the popular occupations in today's on-demand marketplaces is partly discretionary. So what do you mean by discretionary? That means at the discretion of the user, right? At the say of the, in other words, at the option or the choice of the user, right? So what happens here? Demand for many of the popular occupations in this kind of on-demand marketplaces is partly discretionary, right? There's only like it's not fully discretionary. When it becomes simpler to find a reliable home cleaner or high quality photographer, a greater percentage of human needs translate into actual demand for labor because it is more feasible for people to find the providers they are looking for. That's something interesting, right? So when people realize that now it's more convenient for me to find a service provider, more convenient for me to find a plumber, more convenient for me to find an electrician, right? Or it's very easy for me to now find a person to clean my home, right? So what happens when people realize this is a great percentage of human needs translate into actual demand for labor, right? So therefore, a lot of our needs actually become converted to actual demand for labor. Sometimes needs might just be needs and they might not actually be converted to an actual demand. Actually, we might not try to search for a person to make that repair. Actually, we might not try to search for a person to clean our houses because it's not convenient, because I don't have that ease of access. But what happens with these platforms? I get ease of access. Things become convenient for me to find a service provider. Then what might I do? I will try to, in fact, create demand for those kinds of services which are driven by my actual needs. Why? Because it is more feasible for me to find people that I actually need to find. That is why it is mentioned on the third point, the demand for many of the popular occupation in on-demand marketplaces is partly discretionary, right? It gets converted to a demand simply because it's convenient, not because sometimes it's always an option, right? Just because there is more availability and ease of access, it becomes converted to a demand. There is also a better alignment between what they want and the service or provider they eventually find, right? In these kinds of marketplaces, another observation that we make is there is a better matching, a better correspondence, a better alignment between what is needed and the service provided, right? There is a matching of the two sides. And now in Sri Lanka also, I think I remember these kinds of advertisements being advertised on these kinds of platforms, right? For example, I remember this advertisement on badakaru.lk where they mentioned that for all your household needs, we can provide handymans to work on your household needs, right? So these kinds of concepts are also becoming popular in our country, right? There are many other platforms such as that as well. Thus, when a new electronic marketplace comes to town, there's no reason to always expect lower wages because of a sudden increase in the supply of workers. So when a new such platform or a new digital marketplace becomes popular in a particular city, it's not always necessary that the number of suppliers will get increased and that the number of wages will get decreased, right? Instead, we explained what kind of change happens in the marketplace earlier, right? So what might explain this rise in wages? එහෙනම් මේ කියන විදිහට wages අඩු අපි හිතුවට දැන් මේ වගේ platforms ඇවිල්ලා ගොඩක් අය suppliers of labor වැඩි වෙලා, right? Service providers ලා වැඩි වෙලා wage rates decrease වෙයි කියලා අපි හිතුවට it doesn't happen so always, right? So then why would there be an increase in wages? What might explain an increase in wages? Well, the assertion that new marketplaces will result in perfect competition and depress earning levels focuses on one older aspect of economic theory, while ignoring a different aspect that has gained a great deal of attention in the last 40 years. Although in traditional markets, we assume that new marketplaces will create perfect competition and it might decrease the earning potential of the participants to the service providers or the suppliers in the market. These kinds of theories have been sort of taken aback, and new theories, actually economic theories like information asymmetry, have become more relevant to the marketplaces in the modern context, right? Although one might assume that there will be a difficulty to provide work and that the wage rates will go down, actually what happens is there might be an actual increase in wage rate. Why? Because of these theories such as information asymmetry that we talk about in economics. What do we talk about in information asymmetry? Now, information asymmetry is imbalance or inequality in types of information. So information asymmetry, in simplest of terms, is when one party to a transaction has more information regarding the transaction than the other party. If we take a supplier and a buyer, maybe the supplier has more information regarding the transaction than the buyer, or the other way around. Most of the cases in traditional markets, what happens is supplier may have more information regarding the product or service that they are providing than the buyer, right? So there is a information asymmetry. Suppose we are selling a car. If the supplier knows more information about the car that he or she does not disclose to the buyer, then the supplier has more information than the buyer. So those information can actually create a difference in the way the transaction is executed, right? Because the buyer is buying the car without having full information about the nature of the car. So there's an information asymmetry, right? So what happens in sharing economy platforms? Sharing economy platforms can reduce many forms of information asymmetry. මේ තියෙන තොරතුරු වල තියෙන අසමානතාවය කියන දේ නැති වෙනවා sharing economy එක නිසා. The predictions of economic theory are that such reductions will increase rather than reduce the wages over time. So the explanation is that because of this information asymmetry, what happens is these kinds of reduction of information asymmetry, or in other words, providing better access to information to all parties involved in the transaction, or let's say having a better transparency of information. In other words, this causes uh, the wage rate to increase rather than decrease, right? And now how can that happen? Now suppose, for example, in a market, in a market for selling cars, like I mentioned earlier, right? Let's say the used cars are being traded in a market, right? So there might be two kinds of used cars, one of very high quality and another car of low quality. Right? So assume that prospective buyers have no way of determining the real quality of a used car before purchasing that car, right? Then the price that a buyer would be willing to pay, the price that a consumer will be, they will like to pay, will be determined between the value of that high quality car and the value of the low quality car, right? However, observing that the price that can be claimed by the high quality car owners is lower than the price that can be claimed by sometimes the value of the real value of their vehicle. What happens in these kinds of markets is that high quality sellers may try to exit the market, leaving only the low quality cars remaining in the market, right? So then less trade takes place within the market. So even the low quality cars may be sold at unusually higher rates sometimes. So when high quality owners observe that the real quality of their cars cannot be realized by selling, or the real value of their cars cannot be realized by selling in these kinds of market, they will withdraw themselves from the market. And also if the buyers of these cars are risk averse, right, then this price that they quote between the high quality car and the low quality car will actually be lower than the average of the two values that we observe, right? Now suppose this same setup changes in a way that now we are doing vehicle inspections, right? Now we are doing vehicle inspections. Now the buyer has a great information transparency or a quality transparency regarding the quality of the car. There's more information available. Then the buyers are able to get a better idea about whether the vehicle is actually good as the seller says, whether it's actually worth the price that is being advertised. Then the sellers of high quality cars can get a price that is closer to the fair value of the actual value of their product, right? Then buyers start trusting the used car market. Then they start trusting used cars more. Then people tend to trade or sell these kinds of cars more often. Transactions happens more often. Then the economy grows, and importantly, the average price and the quality of the cars also goes up and not down, right? So therefore, as a result, what happens is, thus with the presence of Upwork, Handy and TaskRabbit, in the presence of these kinds of platforms, and in particular their screening process and review systems, now they have screening for quality, right? When something is listed, these platforms have a system of screening for quality, and also they have a review system where consumers can post reviews and such. So there's better transparency, right? Maybe the workers are rated in these platforms, right? So prospective consumers of services can now get a better sense for quality of different service providers. They can choose between who is good and who is bad, who is the quality service provider and who is not, who is more experienced, who is inexperienced, right? How can they arrive at these decisions? Relying on the assessments that come both from the crowd and from experts, right? Sometimes on these platforms, there will be expert reviews, there might be expert certifications, And also consumers will also rate these people. So now the information asymmetry is no longer there. Now there is better access to information and a better decision can be made by consumers. Therefore, what happens is more of them will seek these services than in the past. So then consumers like make a reliable platform එක මේක ඉන service providers ලා reliable අය qualified අය මෙයාලට හොඳ ratings තියෙනවා මම මෙයාගේ service එක obtain කරොත් මට හොඳ quality service එකක් ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒතර මොකද වෙන්නේ මෙයා නැවත නැවත මේ platform එක පාවිච්චි කරන්නට උනන්දු වෙනවා. Right? Better providers have an incentive to provide more since they can charge an hourly rate closer to the value of their services. And also because poor performance can restrict future work opportunities if it leads to negative review visible to prospective customers. Then consumers lage පැත්තෙන් අර විදිහේ වෙනස්කමක් වෙනකොට service providers ලටත් වගකීමක් එනවා වඩාත් හොඳ සේවාවක් සපයන්න. ඇයි? එහෙම හොඳ සේවාවක් සැපයීම තුලින් එක පැත්තකින් එයාලට හැකියාව තියෙනවා hourly rate එකක් charge කරන්න එයාලගේ service එකේ ඇත්ත value එකට ගොඩක් සමීප wage rate එකක් charge කරන්න යාට හැකියාව තියෙනවා මොකද යා quality service එකක් ලබා දෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අනිත් පැත්තෙන් if they perform poor, right, if their job is not up to the standard, what happens, their opportunity to obtain future work will be obstructed. Why? Because negative reviews will be posted under their name, right? Furthermore, in the long run, a greater level of wage transparency can have additional benefits for workers and not just for today's geo-specific service-oriented peer-to-peer platforms. මේ වගේ platforms වල long run එකේදී wage transparency එකකුත් ඇති වෙනවානේ. මොන වගේ rates ද අය වෙන්නේ මේ වගේ කාර්යයකටද කියන එක ඕන කෙනෙකුට දැක බලා ගැනීමේ හැකියාව තියෙනවා. That information is available. Information transparency is there. That can benefit workers, not like geo-specific platforms. That means like geographically bound platforms that in no way we can know the real actual prices that are being charged, right? Example, a platform like Upwork exposes both the users and providers to industry norms, right? මේ වගේ platforms වලින් service provider ඒ වගේම service එක ලබා ගන්න අය කියන දෙගොල්ලටම industry එකේ දැනට පවතින සමතුලිතය ගැන දැනට පවතින normality එක ගැන idea එකක් ගන්න උදව් කරනවා, right? So it's not that common in a usual traditional marketplace, right? There's no way of us knowing what is the usual charge. අපි මේ service provider ගෙන් අහලා දැනගන්න හැරෙන්න අපිට වෙන විදිහක් නැහැ ඒක දැනගන්න. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒ කාර්යය කරපු තව කෙනෙක්ගෙන් අපිට අහන්න පුළුවන් මේ වැඩේට කීයක් මෙයා charge කරාද. ඒ හැර අපිට ඒ ගැන දැනගන්න විදිහක් නැහැ. As a result, workers breaking into the industry can set rates in accordance with industry standards in the country from which their demand originates. එතකොට මෙයා workers ලා මේ වගේ markets වල participate වෙනකොට, right? එයාලට බලන්න පුළුවන් මොන වගේ markets වලින්ද එයාලට වැඩි demand එකක් ඇති වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ අනුව එයාලට හැකියාව තියෙනවා එයාලගේ wage rate එක, එයාලගේ pay rate එක ඒකට අනුකූලව adjust කරගන්න, right? And workers in lower purchasing power parity countries might end up realizing their skills are worth more than they thought. Now, assume in these kinds of platforms where you don't have to be geographically bound. Now, there are certain occupations where you have to be geographically present to provide the service, like a plumber, for example, right? But when they are all in a platform where service can be provided from anywhere, right? Service can be provided from anywhere. Like, for instance, someone can be a web designer or someone can be a document editor from anywhere in the world, right? So in this kind of a setting, right? In this kind of a setting, rather than just constraining them into a single marketplace, a single country. If I'm from Sri Lanka, I can offer web designing services to the USA or Malaysia or China, right? So then in according to the demand situation in that country, one thing, as I explained earlier point, I can adjust my charge, right? Depending on where the demand is coming from. Also, if I'm working in a low purchasing power parity country, then I can also realize, on the other hand, I can charge more than this if I can provide this service to a high purchasing power parity country, right? Maybe in Sri Lanka, the amount I'm able to charge is low, and I can realize that by participating in platforms like this. If I consider platforms like USA, the rate that I can charge is way higher, right? So that realization of the worth of my skill level, right? What my skills are really worth can be that understanding is an advantage for me as a service provider. In this way, decreased information asymmetry across providers may counteract some of the negative impacts of increased global competition. තොරතුරු වල අසමානතාවය කියන එක නැතිවීම නිසා සර්විස් ප්‍රොවයිඩර්ස්ලට පුළුවන් වැඩි වෙන ගෝලීය තරඟකාරීත්වයෙන් ඇතිවන ඍණාත්මක ප්‍රතිඵලවලට එරෙහිව එයාලට යම් පවර් එකක් ලැබෙනවා. Although whether it will negate them entirely in the long run remains an open question. But in the long run, whether it will continue to be so, whether we will always be positively rewarded, whether you will always be able to beat the negative sides of the competition is not assured in the long run, right? So these are areas that are open to discussion and remain questionable, right? For most of the past 500 years, now we are moving to a new subtopic, new generalism, right? So we saw how new marketplaces create changes in labor markets, right? Right. Now, when it comes to the concept of new generalists, what happens here? For most of the past 500 years, and specifically since the advent of industrialization, we have observed progressively greater specialization in our economies. Rather than the period before the industrialization, where a lot of general nature work was conducted, right? With the advent of the industrialization, a lot of work started becoming specialized, right? We witnessed this initially as manufacturing became increasingly compartmentalized in the 19th and early 20th century. So during this period, the nature of work that was done was initially very much specialized or divisioned to specific units or specific areas, right? They were very much divisioned. For example, something has been stated here as an example. Shoe heels, for instance, could be manufactured in one shop and attached to uppers in another shop. Rather than the pre-industrialized era where the entire shoe was made by one person, or the entire shoe was made by, let's say, a particular company even sometimes. Now, there might be someone who is specializing only in shoe heels. There might be someone specializing only in the upper part of the shoe. So they find the most efficient way of manufacturing this part of the shoe in their own, in a way that is, unique to that particular person, right? Over the last century, other professions ranging from medicine to education have seen a rise in specialization as their science became increasingly complex. So this has been observed in many other ranges of work as well, right? Starting from medicine to education. For example, general medicine, the idea of providing general medicine was removed, and a number of specialties in medicine practice came, right? Specialists arrived rather than doctors generally providing medicinal advice and providing consultation and providing medicine to their people who come to see them. increasingly after these ages, specialists started appearing, right? And even earlier, maybe some of you have also heard, teachers in schools, they tended to teach the entire class, right? Sometimes all the subjects, not just specific to one subject. Teacher in one class taught all the subjects, right? This was the case way back in time. But now it's not so. There are teachers specializing in, certain age levels, certain subjects, right? And specialized to certain types of schools, right? So likewise, specialization emerged a lot. So across fields, one's economic success became increasingly contingent on specialization. So because of this arrival of the concept of specialization, in order to be successful, one had to be specialized in some sort of area, right? So depending on that expertise only, they were able to progress higher and higher in their career. However, this changed with the emergence of sharing economy platforms, right? With sharing economy platforms, however, we are witnessing an interesting revival of the generalist. The generalist la නැවත වාරයක් එන බව ආගමනයක් තියෙන බව අපිට පේනවා sharing economy platforms වල. There's a resurfacing of generalists. How does this happen? Let's see. The blurring of lines between personal and professional and between formal work and casual work creates a range of opportunities for non-specialists. Even if someone is a non-specialist, even if someone does not have a single particular expertise, right? Or even the person is not a specialist in a particular designated area, we increasingly observe that the boundaries between personal work and professional work is being blurred, or you no longer are able to clearly set a line or a boundary across this kind of these two types, right? And also what is formal work and what is casual work. Because of these sharing economy platforms, these kinds of concepts are trying to become very much ambiguous, and also the boundaries are trying to disappear, right? So these kinds of changes are creating more and more opportunities for people who are not specialists. For example, a lab technician can easily moonlight as an innkeeper by renting out a spare room on Airbnb. Even a person who is a very specialized technician in a lab can easily find another income source as an innkeeper. How? If they have extra property, if they have spare room, they can easily rent it out on Airbnb and still earn an income, right? So not just by being a specialist, now they are, even by being good at 2 or 3 things, still you can thrive in this kind of economy, right? So even if you are, for example, even if I'm a lecturer, I have the opportunity of renting out a spare room or a property somewhere else, right? And during an off hour, an accountant can drive for Uber, right? Or as a side job, they can do that, right? So likewise, this concept of generalization occurs, right? In short, sharing economy platforms are enabling a move away from specialization, right? People are no longer being seen as specialists. How? By allowing a growing number of non-specialists empowered by the capabilities of sharing platforms. How do these specialists get gradually removed? It happens because of the empowering, or because of the power that these sharing platforms provide to people. Because of sharing platforms, people obtain more and more capabilities. Even people who are not specialized in a particular area are able to gain new capabilities because of sharing platforms, right? And by gaining the capabilities provided by these platforms, right, or by the capabilities that are promoted by these kinds of platforms, these non-specialists are also able to provide services that are appealing to the market or that are in demand in the market, right? The shift we are seeing in organizations today is more extensive, right? Now, this concept of, re-engineering of work was first actually popularly discussed with the book written by Michael Hammer in 1990s, right? So many of the job designs or workflows or control mechanisms and organization structures in different competitive environments before the advent of the computer, or before the introduction of the computer, they matured or they came of age after some time, right? Today, these kinds of job designs and workflows or control mechanisms, organizational structures are not what they used to be some time back before technology came. Rather, today they are geared towards more efficiency and more control. That is the focus in today's workplace, right? And also in the today's workplace, right, we place a great importance in areas such as innovation, speed, and also in areas like service quality, right? So those are the things that matter a lot in today's world of work, right? So Hammer also recognized that everything about work will need to change, right? Now this was something that he foresaw in 1990s, right? He thought that everything about work will after some time need to change, including the job design, the organization structure, the management system, and all kinds of work processes, right? So his vision continued to treat that organizations are still at the center of the economy, right? Traditional organization, large traditional organizations, he mentioned that they are not necessarily going to be extinct, right? Rather, what happens is they are going to be burdened, or they are going to be limited by layers of work that are unproductive, and also unproductive overhead, right? Unnecessary overhead and unproductive workers is, what is wrong with organizations according to his viewpoint, right? But when it came to the present context in reality, right, that shift has actually changed than what he saw some time back, right? The organizational changes that we are experiencing today is way more diverse. So along with the re-engineering of work, today we are actually seeing dismantling of centralized workplaces as more and more business operate without a headquarters, right? We are seeing a lot of decentralized nature work, right? Why? Because a lot of work is beginning to happen without a centralized headquarters or a head office, and without a pool of permanent workers. Also, the idea of having permanent workers is trying to dissolve away gradually, right? Opting instead to build enterprises by drawing on workers who are brought in to complete specific projects or tasks. Task-based employment, project-based employment, contract-based employment, these kinds of concepts are becoming increasingly popular in the present world, right? So the re-engineering of work that Hammer foresaw many years ago was not actually what happened. Rather, organizations became decentralized, and there was increasingly the work is not tending to get permanent, right? So these kinds of observations we increasingly make in present day work world. These sharing economy platforms embed capabilities that lower the specialization requirements for many professions. So because of sharing economy platforms, right, and the capabilities that are promoted by these sharing economy platforms. Specialization requirement of people is increasingly becoming lower. Right? දැන් මේ sharing economy platforms නිසා මිනිසුන්ට කළ හැකි කර්තව්‍යයන් බොහොමයක් තියෙනවා. Right? සල්ලි උපයා ගැනීම සඳහා මුදල් උපයා ගැනීම සඳහා අපිට participate වෙන්න පුළුවන් platforms ගණනාවක් තියෙනවා. අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් දේවල් ගණනාවක් තියෙනවා. ඒ හින්දා අපි specialize වෙන්න ඕනේ කියන මතය ක්‍රමක්‍රමයෙන් නැති වෙලා යනවා කියන අදහස තමයි එතන පැහැදිලි කරලා තියෙන්නේ. Right? In some ways akin to the way franchising operations do for many businesses, right? Just like in franchise organizations, franchises do for many businesses, where they don't have to specialize in one kind of particular work, right? Work becomes very much generalized in these kinds of operations. Platform-based work also, people tend to be good at not only just one specific thing, but they are able to do several different things, right? Okay. Then we move to a new subtopic 8.6, immediacy of labor supply, right? Immediacy of labor supply. Right. Work was once relegated to work hours, right? Work was defined by 8 to 5 job, right? 9 to 5 job, right? Likewise, it was limited by work hours. Depending on the profession, work happened during 12-hour shifts or 8-hour work day, right? That was how traditionally the labor markets operated. Today, work can take place in increasingly microscopic units in increments as short as a minute or two. Can you believe that? Not just being engaged in an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. Today, microtasking, the concept of microtasking has appeared so much so that even by engaging in one specific task for a minute or 2 or 5 minutes, you can earn money, right? Let's see what kind of marketplaces. The new marketplaces spawned by the sharing economy are allowing us to tap into labor supply in a much more granular and efficient way. So because of the opportunities that are presented by this sharing economy, it has been made possible for us to provide our labor in very small quantities, in granular quantities, and in a more efficient way. In a small amount of time, we can get a lot of tasks done, as much as also during that time of providing labor supply, we can earn money. Example, on-demand work platform Spare5, which enables people to complete small tasks on their mobile devices in exchange for a fee. So on this Spare5 platform, they pay you for completing small tasks, micro tasks, directly from your phone while you are on the go, right? Main idea of this platform is that you can use the time that you are waiting in a queue, or maybe you're riding a vehicle, you're riding the bus on a way to work, or you're waiting for a friend. Even that small time also, even that 5 minutes time also, you can use for working and earning money, right? So a certain survey has posited that Americans, for example, spend an estimated at least 3 hours per day using their smartphone. Now, this was some time back, but when it comes to the present context, this has increased much more than that, right? The latest survey by datareportal.com on 2022 shows that internet usage average globally is close to 6 hours per day, can be as close as 6 hours per day, right? So maybe, I don't know what the context of the US is at the present, but global average is shown as 6 hours per day, right? So that is a lot of time on the phone per day, right? While part of the time that people spend in completing required tasks, such as, let's say, placing an order for groceries, right? Or maybe paying bills, and maybe you are transacting on a banking app, right? So part of this time that's spent on the mobile in the US market is spent like this. So a quick survey that was done on people like this, and also especially concerning people who are in a queue on a Starbucks. Starbucks is a coffee shop, right? Famous coffee franchise. So Starbucks Starbucks queue, people who spend time in a Starbucks queue, or people who are traveling in a public transportation during rush hours, indicated that this survey indicated that most of the 3 hours that were detected are spent by doing less necessary tasks, or let's say unproductive tasks, right? Like playing games or Fruit Ninja, things like that. Even Candy Crush game became popular sometime back, right? So a lot of these 3 hours is spent in this way when you are spending time on queues or traveling on public transport and things like that. So what Spare 5 did was, interestingly, their idea was to spare 5 minutes, right? You can spare 5 minutes or more if you are able to. And like the time that you spend in that time to play video games and things like that, you can turn into money-making opportunity. So what are the nature of tasks that are popular in Spare 5? You can Google this and you can watch YouTube videos on how this happens, right? There are very interesting work platforms. So these tasks may include things like tagging photos, for example, right? Tagging photos on behalf of a company, or completing certain surveys for a payment, or maybe, things like inserting keywords as taglines for a particular picture, right? Things like that, very small things like that, but are very important for purposes of marketing, profiling of consumers. Sometimes companies may find these tasks very productive to get large parts of work done by assigning small micro amounts of their work to people all around the world, right? So work, therefore, is becoming essentially smaller and smaller, but also very much necessary in the technology-centered society like this. But also the downside is that sometimes it might tend to get boring, and downsides like that may occur, right? In theory, companies benefit by tapping into the time of skilled and knowledgeable workers, and workers benefit by recuperating lost time, right? So companies on one hand can benefit by tapping into knowledgeable, skilled workers and assign certain tasks to them, micro tasks. And also workers have the benefit of using their time productively. For example, the time they are currently wasting as they commute to and from work, or sit in the waiting room of a doctor's office, or in the lobby of a community center where their child is taking swimming lessons, right? So that time you waste, you can put to earning money. In a nutshell, so per hour wage rate, you can observe these platforms offer a per hour wage rate, sometimes even for 5 minutes, for half an hour. There is a way for you to earn wage, right? There's a wage rate. In a nutshell, labor efficiency is increased not by extracting more out of existing employees. Now, the earlier traditional versions of economy, labor efficiency, the labor efficiency happened by getting as much as possible from the employees, squeezing work out of the employees as much as possible from a given amount of time. But this concept has transformed in the new economy by foraging for lost moments of time that can be turned into work. So in the new economy, what is accounted for efficiency is not squeezing the best out of employees, but by converting the idle time, or let's say by converting the unproductive or the lost time of the employees also into work, right? That is how concept of efficiency has transformed. Of course, this may come at a social cost. There is a downside for everything. So there also a negative effect is there in this concept. If we are spending all our space time digitally scurrying between micro tasks, we may sacrifice valuable leisure, negating some of the work-life balance benefits that being a micro entrepreneur affords. So the negative side or the downside is that by engaging even our free time in work, we might lose our leisure time. Also, we might lose our work-life balance, the time we spend with our family and things like that, right? So those downsides are there. Right. Then we move on to 8.7, task economy, right? Now, this concept is also very much closely associated to the idea of immediacy of labor supply. In the past, hiring thousands of workers to carry out small tasks wasn't feasible because of the high administrative costs of such a structure. So hiring more and more workers to get our work done was not profitable for companies because a high administrative cost had to be incurred. The laborers had to be paid. They had to be taken care of. Insurance had to be provided. Worker protection had to be provided. And there are related overheads are there, right? Administration cost is there, right? Today, smaller and smaller tasks can increasingly be outsourced with minimal transaction costs to crowds of workers connected to digital platforms. But when it comes to the present context, how has this changed? Work has become smaller and smaller, like we understood in the earlier subsection. These smaller and smaller tasks can increasingly be outsourced with minimal transaction cost to crowds of workers connected to digital platforms at a very low cost, right? Simply by creating a platform or simply by listing ourselves in a platform, we can assign small amounts of work to workers who are also a part of these digital platforms who are spread all around the world. Do we have to pay a lot of maintenance cost in maintaining this labor like we had to do in traditional setting? No. නේ අපි පඩියක් ගෙවලා අපි මොන හරි ඉන්ෂුරන්ස් එකක් දීලා benefits දීලා administrative cost එකක් දරලා නෙමෙයි අපි මේ work තවදුරටත් ලබා ගන්න. So this is called as taskification sometimes. An early example of this form of taskification can be seen in the popular Amazon's Mechanical Turk. This is also referred to as MTurk. I will show you a video on that, which connects millions of workers around the world to customers who have broken down projects into simple tasks with compensation ranging from a few pennies to a couple of dollars. So this platform MTurk by Amazon has the ability of putting together many workers all around the world, right? And convert them can connect millions of workers all around the world with customers by breaking down projects into very minute or granular amounts of work or simple tasks, right? And for this task, starting from small pennies, you have the potential of even earning a couple of dollars, right? The scope of work that can be done on the microtask platforms we have discussed, however, seems limited. However, the range of work that can be covered via these kinds of microtasking platforms that we talked about may be limited, right? It is actually subject to debate, right? Whether it's really effective. So let me share with you a video on how this MTurk platform works.
We've all been there. Piles of data that needs to be reviewed and means you'll be spending hours, days, or weeks on a repetitive task. Endless spreadsheets, folders jammed with images, or a long list of sales leads. Worse is when that pile is simply overwhelming. What to do? Pull more members of the team into it? That's neither scalable nor a good use of your team's time. Instead of spending hours of your team's time, it's time to take a look at Amazon Mechanical Turk. Mechanical Turk is a crowdsourcing service provided by Amazon that connects you with thousands of people who are excited to help you with your project. MTurk workers are people just like you in the US and around the world who are happy to earn a little extra money contributing to your project. Mechanical Turk workers excel at doing all of the tasks that people are good at, such as categorizing businesses, images, and data, transcribing images, audio, and video, comparing items and data records, evaluating items for quality or cleaning up issues, collecting data from various places on the internet, and a wide range of other tasks. Instead of dividing all that work amongst a few overworked members of your team and letting them spend the next 3 weeks working through it, you can make it available to thousands of workers in the crowd. Each worker will do 1, 2, or more of your tasks. By dividing them up amongst so many workers, your work will get done much more quickly, in many cases in a matter of hours. Each of your tasks is presented to workers as a form that they can complete on the web. In most cases, you provide workers with enough information to complete the task and fields where they can provide the information that you need. To improve accuracy, MTurk also makes it easy to route each task to multiple workers. Because even the most diligent worker can sometimes make a simple mistake, particularly when the right answer is a judgment call, getting multiple responses is a great way to increase the accuracy of your results. In this case, one of our workers accidentally clicked on the wrong category, but because we asked 2 other workers, we know that the right category is cat. The more workers you ask, the higher the accuracy you can expect. You can even use Mechanical Turk as a panel for your survey or study by asking for hundreds of workers to respond to your task. To get results that are accurate, fast, and affordable, we encourage you to give Amazon Mechanical Turk a try.
Sorry, right. So you saw in that video how MTurk platform or the Mechanical Turk platform works and how small amounts of work can be outsourced at a very low cost for the company, benefiting both the worker and the company as well. Next, we are moving to the last subtopic of right. There's one more thing to discuss before we move on to the last subtopic. So as work is divided into ever smaller units or specific tasks, organizations can thus choose to dedicate a full-time employee to do more work like they have in the past, right? So when a work is divided into these kinds of granular forms, organizations can choose to, dedicate either a person who is working full-time on that kind of project to do a lot of more work than they have done in the past, or they have the option to hire one contractor or many contractors, part-time workers, to carry out these kinds of work that would have been carried out by a single full-time employee, right? That advantage is there. The advantage to organizations of the latter approach is that there's more scope to make sure tasks are completed when they need to be completed without keeping workers idle on the payroll, right? So the advantages that the organizations have in the latter approach, that means by subcontracting, or let's say by hiring different contractors instead of having one full-time employee, the benefit of that is that there's more scope to make sure tasks are completed when they need to be completed, right? When you set a timeline, you can get it done by distributing it among a reasonable number of contract employees, and when they need to be completed, you can get the task completed and without having any idle time in the payroll, right? Idle time is an issue that organizations have when you're having permanent employees, right? Okay, so moving ahead, in addition, hiring, recruitment, and compensation can take place outside of regular work hours. because sharing economy platforms that match contractors to organizations are on all the time. In addition, the task of hiring, recruitment, and compensation can, in these kinds of model, can happen outside the usual work hours, since sharing economy, these kinds of platforms in the sharing economy always can match contractors that are contractors with the organization's requirement, because it's always on, right? It's online. There is no like work shift, and even outside regular work hours, still your organization's work will be happening, because you don't know who is working. Someone from the USA will be working on your company's project, someone from India will be working, someone from Sri Lanka will be working. So it can be essentially out of regular work hours, and also it saves the company the pain of having to worry about all the hiring process, the recruitment process, compensation, employee training and development. A lot of effort that company has to put also taken out of the company. As the matching of work to skills gets increasingly automated, right? When the work requirement and the skill gets automatically matched, this also enables organizations to more easily work with contractors in different time zones, right? Based on the work preferences, based on the past performance done, based on the skill levels of employees, it will be more convenient to gradually match the two parties, right? So because of this, it becomes increasingly easier to work with people from different time zones, no matter where they are located. Right. Now, the last subtopic we are going to discuss under this section. As we move into an economy where work is decomposed into tasks done around the world, performed in people's spare time or through on-demand platforms, like we discussed earlier, right? And services are provided by freelancers working through multiple platforms or offered by generalists who may be specialists in something else. Our systems to keep track of how much employment there is in the economy start to get seriously challenged. Now, when these granular forms of work happen, when the number of work types of different work that a single person can do is increasing, that range of work is increasing, the number of platforms they can work is increasing. Their job might be something else, but still there might be cases where they are freelancing on other platforms and offering to work and earning compensation from those platforms as well. Then there comes an issue in an economic sense. How are we going to measure all this work? The platforms වල සේවය කරන අයකුත් ඉන්නවා, ඊට අමතරව එයාට permanent job එකකුත් තියෙනවා, ඊට අමතරව platforms වල විතරක් freelance ව වැඩ කරන අය ඉන්නවා, කුඩා අර වගේ දැන් පොඩි work projects වල වැඩ කරන අය ඉන්නවා. ඒතර කොහොමද employment කියන එක measure කරන්නේ අපි? කොහොමද economic systems, ministries, countries විදියට අපේ රටේ employment එක ගැන අපි track එකක් තියාගන්නේ කොහොමද කියන challenge එක අපිට එනවා. For most of the second half of the 20th century, most Americans worked a single profession at a time as a full-time job, right? So during the most part of the 20th century, it is said that Americans used to stick to a single job as a full-time job. It was the case in our country also, right? If they lost that job, they were out of work until they found another full-time job. So if you're sort of terminated from the job, or if you lose one job, there will be a period of unemployment until you find another job, right? But in today's economy, it's not the case, right? Being employed or unemployed is becoming increasingly difficult to measure as micro-entrepreneurship, multiple gigs, freelance work, and fluid self-employment muddle traditional definitions and measures. That is true. Even if like you lose a job, even if you're not permanently engaged in a job, you might have your own small venture that you work on, right? Maybe you're creating content, Maybe you're a micro entrepreneur, you're working on small projects, right? You are providing your services on certain platforms to someone. Maybe you're designing for someone, right? Maybe you're composing music on a platform. Maybe you're freelancing on a certain platform. Or maybe, let's say, you are driving for Uber or PickMe, right? So likewise, maybe you are not actually out of employment per se, right? Essentially, you are having some sort of work which gives you money. Maybe you are a YouTube video creator. You have your own YouTube channel and maybe you are getting views for that, right? And maybe ad placements happen through those, and maybe you're earning revenue through your YouTube videos, or maybe you're an influencer on Instagram and maybe you're earning throughout that Instagram work. So how are we going to measure this work? Does that count as employment? So that's a challenge, right? As a growing number of individuals no longer conform to the 20th century ideal of having a job, and as more employees become micro entrepreneurs in their spare time, the line between losing and gaining jobs becomes increasingly difficult to measure, right? So, how are we going to distinguish between someone losing a job and how are we going to identify when someone is gaining job? What is the line that we are going to use to differentiate between the two, right? What does it mean to have a job? So those are the real challenges that are difficult to measure in the new era. How then do we measure employment in the sharing economy? A natural question in the United States is whether unemployment numbers being collected by Labor Department are sophisticated enough to capture these changes. Now, United States also, they have this issue of whether the official statistics provided by Labor Department reflect this unemployment numbers. Are people really unemployed? Now, imagine in Sri Lanka, the situation, do you think they get accurately captured? It's highly unlikely, right? Part of the challenge also lies in how people who do these activities think of them. Now, another way to look at it is how do people actually view themselves? The Uber full-time Uber driver කෙනෙක්, එහෙම නැත්නම් PickMe driver කෙනෙක්, එයා කොහොමද එයාම දකින්නේ? How do they classify themselves? Right? This is also one approach of trying to find an answer to this challenge. Survey questions that ask about your job, your main job, your other job, your business may lead people in the sharing economy to underreport what they are up to simply because they don't think of their activities in those terms. Then අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් traditionally ඔයාගේ main job එක මොකක්ද? ඔයාගේ ඒ job එකට අමතරව කරන job එක මොකක්ද? එහෙම නැත්නම් ඔයාගේ business එක මොකක්ද? ඒ වගේ වචන වලින් අපි define කරන්න උත්සාහ කරාට මේ employment කියන දේ sharing economy එකකදී මේ වගේ ප්‍රශ්න හරහා එහෙම නැත්නම් මේ වගේ areas හරහා ඇත්තටම මිනිස්සු කරන වැඩ capture කර ගැනීමේ අපහසුතාවයක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන් කරන වැඩ ඔය කියන job එක එහෙම නැත්නම් රස්සාව එහෙම නැත්නම් මගේ business එක විදියට ඒක අඳුනගන්නේ නැහැ වෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් still they are earning money. They are participating in the economy in some way. Right? For example, a driver on BlaBlaCar. You know what BlaBlaCar is, right? A carpooling platform. A driver on BlaBlaCar thinks he's taking gas money to drop people off while he's already on his way from Munich to Hamburg. Then, ඇත්තටම BlaBlaCar එකේ ඔපරේට් කරන කෙනෙක් එක් නගරයක ඉඳන් අනිත් නගරයකට යනකොට ඒ රයිඩ් එකෙන් එයාට රයිඩ් එක ෂෙයා කරන අයගෙන් යම් මුදලක් හම්බ වෙනවා. නමුත් එයා ඇත්තටම ඒක හිතනවා ඒක ඇත්තටම එයාට එන earning එකක්. නමුත් එයා ඒක එහෙම හිතන්නේ නැහැ වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එයා හිතන්නේ මම මේ ටවුන් එකේ ඉඳන් අනිත් ටවුන් එකට යන්න මට ගිය තෙල් වියදම තමයි මට මේ හම්බුනේ. එහෙම හිතනවා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඇයි? එයා වැඩට යන ගමන් තමයි මිනිස්සු ටික දාගෙන යන්නේ නේ. එතකොට ඇත්තටම එයා හිතන්න පුළුවන් මේ travelling expense එක මට cover වුණා මේගොල්ලන්ගෙන් ආව සල්ලි වලින්. එතනින් එහාට දෙයක් එයා ඒ ගැන හිතන්නේ නැහැ වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? So then how are we going to record that? How are we going to classify that? Right? How does that get recorded in our economy? How does that get recorded in our GDP? So those are the real issues. Just as the impacts of the sharing economy have proven difficult to fully capture using existing economic measures, right? Such as GDP, the creation of work in the sharing economy cannot be easily understood using established employment measures. Then මේ sharing economy එකේ තියෙන යම් impacts නිසා දැනට අපිට පවතින economic measures අපිට ඒ විදිහටම capture කර ගැනීමේදී යම් ගැටලු ආවට දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට employment, right? Employment rate, unemployment rate. ඔවා කොහොමද අපි measure කරන්නේ sharing economy එක. මේක difficult වෙලා තියෙනවා. right? එතකොට such as GDP, creation of work in the sharing economy cannot be easily understood using established employment measures. අපිට දැනට පවතින employment measures පාවිච්චි කරලා අපි දැනට work කියන එක කියන්නේ වෘත්තියක් කියන එක එහෙම නැත්නම් රැකියා වියුක්තභාවය රැකියා නියුක්තභාවය වගේ දේවල් දැනට අපි measure කරන්න පාවිච්චි කරන ඒ මිනුම් දඩු පාවිච්චි කරලා එහෙම නැත්නම් අපේ දල දේශීය නිෂ්පාදිතය දල ජාතික නිෂ්පාදිතය අපේ GDP එක මේ වගේ measures පාවිච්චි කරලා right අපිට අපහසුයි කියලා කියනවා මේ කියන sharing economy එකේ තියෙන impacts fully අපිට කියන්නේ explain කරන්න right. We also need to develop metrics that take into account job quality, income stability, and work-life balance. එතකොට අපිට සිද්ධ වෙනවා right nations විදිහට අපිට යම් මිනුම් දඬු යම් measurements ඇති කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා මේ වෘත්තියක තියෙන ගුණාත්මක භාවය job quality එක ආදායමේ ස්ථාවර භාවය right. The stability of the income, whether there is a stable source of income for a person, right? And what kind of work-life balance does he or she have, right? These things also need to be measured. For example, a person who is working on spare file, a person who is working on MTurk is earning money maybe, but what about the job quality, right? Job quality, maybe he as a for work, what he or she does is maybe tagging people in photos, or maybe entering certain keywords to recognize certain products, right? Or maybe adding hashtags, maybe clicking or sharing. But how do you measure the job quality in such instances, right? Is there a stability in the income in these kinds of jobs? And is there a work-life balance? So these are the metrics that also need to be developed in new settings like this. A full-time job that requires a long and expensive daily commute may in fact be less desirable than 2 part-time jobs carried out from home, right? Now, for example, in this kind of new work era, a full-time job owner, right? A person who is having a full-time job will actually not like to travel a long time for maybe 1 hour or 2 hours on a public commute or even in the personal vehicle. Even if he has a job, permanent job, it will be less desirable, or he will choose to have 2 different part-time jobs that he can work from while being at home itself over that single permanent job, right? So measuring this by using existing metrics is difficult. So this is the context, employment context that is existing in the present. මට permanent job එකක් තිබුණා. දැන් ඒක තියනවා right? ගොඩක් වෙලාවට මිනිස්සු permanent job එකක් කරන්නේ නැහැ. සමහරව ඉන්නවා permanent job එකෙන් අයින් වෙලා එයා ගෙදර ඉඳන් YouTube channel එකක් කරනවා. right? එතන YouTube channel එකක් කරන ගමන් එයා influencer කෙනෙක් විදියට වැඩ කරනවා. right? So likewise, or designer කෙනෙක් විදිහට වැඩ කරනවා. He's doing it by quitting the actual job that he had, right? So how can we measure this by existing economic metrics? That is an issue. whatever new metrics are developed, one thing is clear. Just as our economic measures need to take other factors into account, so too do our employment measures. Now, just like our economic measures that we have at the moment need to take these kinds like job quality, income stability, and work-life balance need to be accounted for, right? Sustainability, equality, these things need to be taken into consideration in our economic measures. At the same time, our employment measures, how do we measure employment? What constitutes a job? How do we call a permanent worker? How do we identify? So likewise, those measures have to be in place. Then finally, we need labor policy that anticipates this ongoing transition, moves past the false dichotomy of employee and independent contractor to redefine how we categorize productive work, decouples the social safety net from full-time employment, and better supports our emerging network society of micro entrepreneurs. So we need new policies, right? New changes that have the ability of correctly predicting or correctly foreseeing the changes that are happening at the moment. So in doing so, we will have to break away the, the divisions that are there in the society, such as employee and contractor. And we need to be able to define again how we can classify productive work, right? How can we identify, how can we, break away the connection between a full-time employment and the social safety that is provided because of that, right? So these connections may have to be disconnected, right? And also, how can we, using our policy changes, pave for or reinforce or support this upcoming society of micro entrepreneurs that is emerging as a result of these networks and platforms, right? So we need policy changes that address these areas. We also need to think hard about whether the corporate ownership structures of the 20th century are adequate for this new world of work, right? So are our ownership structures, our corporate structures, are they supporting this new type of work? Are they equipped to face this new world? Do they have the capabilities to do that? Do they possess the structures to be a part of this world, right? Those are the questions that we need to critically think about in this new economy that we talk about. Right. So with that, we come to the end of our unit number 8, right? I think we engaged in some very interesting, very timely and productive discussions throughout this lecture. I believe you have gained a lot of new insights into the nature of work and employment in this new economic era, right? So I would, at the end, like to share with you a small video clip, a part of a video clip, which talks about the issues in the in this new shared economy, right? Or better yet, rather than just playing the small part, I will actually make it available for you on the LMS so that you can refer to the entire video clip. So go through it and see this idea of changing landscape of employment and the nature of issues that it has given birth to, and what types of things that we need to think of, worry about when we are engaging in these kinds of network economy that we are facing, right? All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.